it's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation.
What are you people? On dope?
Where you can toke.
I inhale frequently.
Or you can talk.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Or you can toke and talk.
10 federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
While we talk about toke on Toker Talk Radio.
So, by the way, when it comes to pot, if you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
Live from beautiful Portland, Oregon at Rolla J Studios.
Hey, this is great. Just not cannabis.
Plus your calls live at 971-533-7111.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel? Gateway theory doesn't work. It's a reality.
Holland, is it real? Don't tease me.
We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years.
And now, here's your host, the guru of ganja graphics, the sultan of sativa statistics, and the worst nightmare of a reefer mad prohibitionist. A polite, perspicacious, productive pothead with a propensity for PowerPoint. Radical, Russ Belville.
All right, welcome back, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. Time for Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio, where you can toke, you can talk, and you can talk about toke. Our phone lines are open at 971-533-7111. We're also checking out the chat room where John Chambers and James and a bunch of other folks are hanging out. You can find our chat room through cannabisradio.com. Just go to the player and click on the little cartoon balloon. That'll get you into our chat room. So I just finished up that rant on the Michigan case from 4 years ago where the cops shot to death a young father in front of his 3-year-old son because the cops smelled marijuana. And because of the smell of marijuana, it was crucial to remove the 3-year-old. And the father disagreed, pulled a small pocket knife, lunged at the cops, and rather than use the tasers that they already had drawn, they holstered their tasers, pulled out their firearm, and shot the guy. Killed him dead right in front of his kid. So I didn't time it very well because I wanted to get the kicker into the end of the rant. And here's the kicker. At the request of the coroner's department, after the young man was shot, they did the toxicology screen on him. No drugs or alcohol found in his system. No trace of marijuana. So that cop who said he smelled marijuana and that was the reason we needed to get that kid out of that apartment because there you got a father who's smoking pot in front of his kid. Guy wasn't even a pot smoker. Guy hadn't been smoking pot in front of his kid at all. So now his kid, who's age 7, had to go to his first day of school without his dad. Will go to perform in his first concert or his first sports event without his dad. Will graduate high school without his dad. Because a cop said, I smell marijuana. Folks, this is why it is so important that we pass marijuana legalization in whatever form makes the ballot, even if it's a shitty Ohio issue 3, because only the legalization of marijuana ends the contraband nature of cannabis. Medical doesn't do that. Decrim doesn't do that. CBD only doesn't do that. Only legalization makes it so possession of marijuana is legal. When you're in a decrim state, marijuana is still illegal. You just get a ticket for it. When you're in a medical state, marijuana is still illegal. You're just exempted from criminal prosecution. But the fact that it's still illegal means it's still contraband. And that means the detection of it, the detection of contraband, is still reason for cops to pursue an investigation. Is still reasonable suspicion for them to start patting you down, asking you questions, and who knows, maybe even shooting you in the chest in front of your 3-year-old. That's why legalization, even just an ounce, even with no home grow, is something you ought to support. Because once that ounce is legal, the smell of marijuana is no longer a reasonable suspicion of anything. And folks, I get people that complain, oh, an ounce isn't enough. Oh, it's just not enough. Folks, it doesn't matter if they legalize a gram. Even legalizing a single gram would mean the smell of marijuana is no longer a reasonable suspicion, because a gram doesn't smell any different than 2 grams, doesn't smell any different than an ounce, doesn't smell any different than a pound. Smell is smell. If that cop in Michigan had smelled marijuana in a legal state, that wouldn't have been enough for him to go ahead and call CPS. That wouldn't have been enough for CPS to get a warrant from the judge to go get that kid. And by not going to get that kid, there never would have been an incident where that man pulled a knife and ended up getting shot. Stay tuned. We're back in 2 minutes with more.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Great websites today need expert web design and development and need to be e-commerce ready and mobile friendly. But building a marketable and profitable website can be an uphill climb. Ready to make your new website or replace your existing website? Think Orange as the new way to get in the black. Orange Hill Development works with Fortune 500 companies and offer the same top quality development service at a fraction of what other providers charge. Brands like Absolute, Carlsberg, and Nestea trust Orange Hill Development. Find out why you should trust your website with Orange Hill. Contact Orange Hill for a consultation today at orangehilldevelopment.com.
How high do you like your profit margin? CannabisRadio.com.
With over 6 years of experience in the industry, New Era CPAs is one of the nation's leading cannabis accounting firms, helping hundreds of growers, dispensaries, and ancillary companies with their tax, legal, and business strategies. New Era CPAs offices cover the West Coast from Seattle to San Diego, and their skilled team is always available to help you take your business to the next level. Visit neweracpas.com for more info and set up a consultation. Welcome to the new era.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Cannabis Confidential with Dr. Dina. Candid.
I want to give you the inside story.
Captivating.
I want to introduce you to my kind and amazingly talented friends.
Compelling.
We get to meet some of the most amazing cannabis activists and warriors around.
Listen in as medical marijuana pioneer Dr. Dina shares never-before-heard stories, chats with cannabis insiders and celebrity friends, and provides invaluable perspective and insight into one of the fastest-growing industries in the world.
I want to share with you what was once confidential information. Let's expose the truth, discuss the issues, and learn the facts.
Cannabis Confidential, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Warning, hits taken on this show are larger than they appear. Do not try this at home. These people are professionals. Or at least they pay me to say that. This is Dan Michaels from danmichaelsaudio.com, and you're listening to Radical Russ on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. It's 8 after the hour, and we are less than 29 hours away from a very important milestone in marijuana activism. And that is the end of federal probation for our good friend, Chris Goldstein. The reason you're listening to me today can all be traced back to Chris Goldstein. Chris Goldstein worked for National Normal, and in 2006, he created the Normal Daily Audio Stash podcast. And 2006, folks, we're talking about a time when most people thought podcast was actors in a play about peas, right? A podcast. But no, nobody knew what podcasting was back then. Very few people did. But Chris had a vision, and he created the Normal Daily Audio Stash podcast, a half-hour podcast produced daily by Normal to bring the growing truth about cannabis to a wider market. He created the podcast in 2006, had to leave it in 2008, and that's when I took over. I took it over on my 40th birthday, January 31st, 2008, and I've been doing this ever since. So I can't thank Chris Goldstein enough for creating my career. Well, Chris is a heavy-hitting activist, folks. He's a guy that puts act in activism. He's been active with New Jersey Normal and Philadelphia Normal, and with his work with Philly Normal, they put together a bunch of protests called Smoke Down Prohibition. And the Smoke Down Prohibition protests, as well as some great data mining done by Derek Rosenzweig of Philly Normal, they showed how 81% of the people getting busted in Philly were African American, and that helped lead to the push for Philly's groundbreaking decriminalization, which has led to like an 80% drop in marijuana arrests in Philly. In addition to the Smoke Down Prohibition they were doing for Philly, they were also protesting at the Liberty Bell Monument. Now, the Liberty Bell Monument is federal parkland. And so they would get together, and at 4:20, they would light up at the Liberty Bell. There's some symbolism for you, right? Let's get our liberty back. At first, the federal park police kind of just let it happen, but apparently they got word from somebody that toking at the Liberty Bell was not something they wanted to see in the headlines, so they started busting these guys, giving them tickets for their smokeout protests at the Liberty Bell, and that culminated in Chris Goldstein's arrest. He actually got arrested for this, had to go to court, had to go to federal court over what he refers to as a skinny-ass joint. And you remember, we're talking about the feds who always say, oh, no, we don't care about the individual drug user. We're trying to get the kingpins. We're kind of trying to get the growers, the drug cartels. Yeah, bullshit. You spent tens of thousands of dollars persecuting and prosecuting Chris Goldstein, a cannabis consumer, because you didn't like the content of his free speech. You didn't like him petitioning the government for a redress of grievances with regard to marijuana prohibition, and you sure as hell didn't like the symbolism of him getting busted at the Liberty Bell. So I believe this cost him somewhere around $3,000, and that's not counting, attorneys and all the other sort of attendant fees that you got to pay. But it cost him $3,000. And cost him 2 years of freedom. For the past 2 years, Chris Goldstein has been on federal probation with mandatory urine screening. He's been pee testing for 2 years now, hasn't used marijuana for 2 years. And I know Chris pretty well, and Chris going without marijuana for 2 years is like asking a Frenchman to go without wine for 2 years, or asking Donald Trump to not say something stupid for 2 years. But he's done it. He's made it through his probation, and this Friday night, Saturday morning, tomorrow, at midnight Eastern time, which would be 9 o'clock p.m. my time out here in Arizona, his federal probation ends. And so I would like to ask all the listeners of CannabisRadio.com and the Russ Belville Show to join me in a virtual smoke session to celebrate and to honor an activist who put his money and his freedom where his mouth is, Chris Goldstein, and join me for what I'm calling hashtag Goldstein Liberty Bowl. We're going to smoke a Chris Goldstein Liberty Bowl, and we're going to do it at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time tomorrow. I'll be on the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour on 420radio.org if you want to join us online to do this. And what we're asking everyone to do is to take a picture of you smoking a joint, and if you like, flipping off the camera, to send a message to the federal government that we stand tall with Chris Goldstein and all of our cannabis warriors out there, and to show them just how many of us there are out there. So hashtag Goldstein Liberty Bowl, that's Goldstein, Goldstein Liberty Bowl, starting at 9 p.m. tomorrow night, Pacific time, midnight Eastern time. We're all going to put our pictures out there on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter with the hashtag to show Chris just how much support he's got out there and how much we appreciate him for his past 2 years of activism. You can find out more on the Russ Belville Show Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/RBShow420, and you can find the event page if you'd like to join us. Spread that information around. Let people know, because we'd really like to make this a special virtual smoke session for Chris Goldstein. All right, let me get to another story. We've been talking about this all week, but now CNN, USA Today, all these super mainstream organizations are starting to pick up on something we in the drug war reform movement have known for decades. And that is Nixon's war on drugs was started particularly to go after hippies and black people. Now, they called us conspiracy theorists for years about this, but the evidence is out there, and it comes from an interview that was done in 1994 featuring John Ehrlichman, who was one of Nixon's domestic policy advisor, and he told Harper's writer Dan Baum about the real reasons behind Nixon's war on drugs. Now, Baum did this interview in 94. The quote kind of came to light in 2012, but the most recent article on Harper's, Legalize It All, the cover story on Harper's this week, has really blown this out of the water and gotten the attention that it's finally deserved. CNN reports on this, and here is the actual quote. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. End quote. Now, that comment from Ehrlichman, CNN writes, is the first time the war on drugs has been plainly characterized as a political assault designed to help Nixon win and keep the White House. It's a stark departure from Nixon's public explanation as to why he had to start the war on drugs, which he framed as a response to the increase in heroin addiction and the rising use of marijuana and hallucinogens by students. Now, I'm glad CNN's coming around to this. I'm glad the Harper's piece is out. I'm glad people are starting to recognize that Nixon was all about the war on drugs as a tool of political control. But this information has been out there for decades. See, Richard Nixon infamously kept a tape recorder running at the White House. These are the so-called Nixon White House tapes, of which 18 minutes were mysteriously disappeared when they started investigating Watergate. But on those Nixon tapes, we have so much evidence of Nixon's rampant racism and anti-Semitism and anti-liberalism with respect to the war on drugs. This is Richard Nixon's quote from 1971. This isn't on the tapes. This was his public quote. This is what he was telling the people about the need to have a war on drugs.
I am glad that in this administration we have increased the amount of money for handling the problem of dangerous drugs sevenfold. It will be $600 million this year. More money will be needed in the future. I want to say, however, that despite our budget problems, to the extent money can help in meeting the problem of dangerous drugs, it will be available. This is one area where we cannot have budget cuts, because we must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
Public enemy number one, the problem of dangerous drugs. No, public enemy number one to Nixon were the anti-war left and blacks, hippies and blacks. And we have to go behind the scenes. We have to go to the Nixon tapes to actually see this in the context that Nixon was speaking. Here's Nixon on the Nixon tapes, and it's difficult to understand some of this audio. It's a little trebly. But this is Richard Nixon calling for a goddamn strong statement against marijuana and asking his advisors, what the Christ is the matter with the Jews? The Jews are all for legalizing marijuana. Give it a listen.
Now, this is what I want a goddamn strong statement on marijuana. Can I get that out of this son of a bitching domestic council? Sure. I mean, one on marijuana that just tears the ass off of them. I see another thing in the news summary this morning, but that's the funny thing. Every one of the bastards that are out for legalizing marijuana is Jewish. What the Christ is the matter with the Jews, Bob? What is the matter with them? I go to the most of them psychiatrists, you know, there's all the
What is your major malfunction, numbnuts?
Yeah, what indeed? What the Christ is the matter with the Jews, Bob? Every one of those bastards out there for legalizing marijuana is Jewish. We got more from the Nixon tapes coming up after this break, but, you listen to stuff like that, you need to take a 420 break, so happy 420, everyone. We'll be right back with more from Tricky Dick right after this.
The smoke is rising, and the next crop of podcasts devoted to cannabis providers and enthusiasts are ready to be harvested. Welcome to the Cannabis Radio Network, founded by respected rainmakers who have been producing award-winning podcasts for over a decade. Industry headlines, business updates, medical reports, marketing, and e-commerce education rolled up perfectly for your consumption. Let's grow together. The Cannabis Radio Network. CannabisRadio.com.
Get the latest updates on the Russ Belville Show by following Radical Russ on Twitter and liking the Russ Belville Show on Facebook.
It's time for cannabis facts about teen drug use from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A recent survey by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control indicates that in states that have legalized medical marijuana, the rate of marijuana consumption among high school students has not increased. In fact, in legal states like Colorado, teen use has actually decreased significantly. It's simply no longer a big deal for teenagers in legal states. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
Seed to sale, clicks to conversions, and more. You're listening to the Cannabis Radio Network.
Don't want to spend money on a night out, but don't know what to do other than watching TV or playing video games? Consider playing guitar, bass, banjo, or mandolin. The instrument will give you hours of entertainment with friends with minimal expense. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
I have a package here for Radical Rick. Is there a Radical Rick here? How about a Rick Russ? Any Rick Russ? Somebody named Freddie Barack has sent him a package. Anybody? What is that? Sounds like a skunk. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Well, you said it. That, of course, Tricky Dick Nixon, Richard Milhouse Nixon, President of the United States from 1968 to 1974, and the architect of what we call the modern war on drugs. Everybody is making hay out of the comment from Ehrlichman that has appeared in the Harper's Magazine piece about the war on drugs being to go against the anti-war left and the blacks, associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then you could criminalize them, you could infiltrate them, you could overturn their seats of power, and so forth. And so we're kind of taking a look at the Nixon tapes here, where the evidence for this has been in the public domain for decades now. So yeah, it's great that Harper's has brought this out, and people are understanding that Nixon used the war on drugs as a political tool, but this is not a surprise for those of us who have been studying it for a while. Here's some comments from Richard Nixon about the Schaefer report. Now, if you don't know your history, Raymond P. Schaefer was a Lutheran Republican governor of Pennsylvania, and a former governor of Pennsylvania, a Republican, right-wing, and Richard Nixon wanted a study, and he commissioned this study, and he put Raymond Schaefer in charge of it to study marijuana. And as we heard in the last segment, what he wanted from that study was a, quote, goddamn strong statement on marijuana. I mean, one that just tears the ass out of them, end quote. Nixon fully believed by putting this panel together, putting the Schaefer Commission together, and putting this Republican in charge of it, they would investigate the evidence around marijuana, the societal impact about marijuana, and come out with some nice sciencey explanations as to why Nixon needed to criminalize marijuana. And of course, he couldn't care less about the science part of it. Nixon wanted to criminalize marijuana to go after the hippies. But you can't really say that in public, so it would have bolstered his case if he could get this commission to report on how terrible marijuana is. And then he'd have the scientific cover he needed for this racist, anti-Semitic, anti-liberal crusade of his. The only problem is that Raymond Schaefer had integrity. Raymond Schaefer's commission investigated hundreds of years of evidence. The British East India report from the 1800s even. The LaGuardia Commission report from the 1940s. They examined all the historical literature and research on marijuana and its effect on society, and they all came to the conclusion that criminalizing it was the worst thing you could do. The Schaefer Commission report came out in 1972 and said marijuana ought to be decriminalized. Well, this put Nixon into a rage because that was exactly the opposite of what he wanted, to be able to demonize the hippies and the blacks. Here's Nixon's reaction when the Schaefer report came out from the Nixon tapes.
Do you have a comment, sir, on the recommendation of your Commission on Drugs that the use of marijuana in the home be no longer considered a crime?
I met with Mr. Schaefer. I read the report. It is a report which deserves consideration for receiving. However, as to one aspect of the report, I am in disagreement. I was before I read it, and reading it did not change my mind. I oppose the legalization of marijuana, and that includes its sale, its possession, and its use. I do not believe you can have effective criminal justice based on the philosophy that something is half legal and half illegal. That is my position, despite what the commission has recommended.
So Nixon admits that before the commission produced the report, he was against legalization, and that he read the report and it didn't change his mind. So what was the whole point of the report there, Tricky Dick? Well, obviously, the point of the report was try to gin up some sort of backing for this racist crusade. I mean, you put together the best scientists, the best researchers, and you decide, well, nope, I'm some dude from California who was a representative in the House, and so therefore I know more than all the scientists do. No, had nothing to do with that, folks. Just had to do with maintaining a racist crusade. And the racist crusade begun by Richard Nixon and the mindset behind it still infects us to this day. To this day, there are legacies of Nixon's attitude that we find reflected in our modern politicians. How many times have you ever heard a politician out there, when confronted with the fact that marijuana is safer than alcohol, will reply with some line along the lines of, well, yeah, but when people drink, they're not trying to get high, they're just being social. But people who smoke dope, why, they just want to get high. It's a stupid argument, of course. Of course, the people that are drinking to be social are doing it to get high. You want any proof of that? Take away the beer and the wine at the next cocktail mixer and replace them with O'Doul's and grape juice. See how well your party goes then. Of course, the people who are drinking to get high. The only difference is with drinking, we understand there's a spectrum of the high. We understand that the effect of alcohol starts at some little tipsy area, and then it moves into buzzed, and then it moves into drunk, and then it moves into hammered, and then it moves into passing out and puking. We know that there's a range. And so when people say they don't drink to get high, what they're saying is, I don't drink to get blackout drunk. I drink to get tipsy or buzzed. Well, folks, that's what marijuana is all about. Those of us that are smoking pot most of the time are not trying to power smoke as much as we possibly can until we pass out. we'll take a puff or 2 or 3 so that we can get buzzed, get a little tipsy, get a little social. It always kills me when they say, oh, well, drinkers drink to be social, tokers smoke to get high. Well, what's more social than a joint circle? Standing around with a bunch of strangers passing around a joint. How could you get more social than that? I don't often see a circle full of people with a stein of beer passing a stein of beer around to each other. You don't see that. But that whole attitude, drinkers drink to be social, tokers smoke to get high, that comes from Richard Nixon, ladies and gentlemen. Here's some more of the recordings from the Nixon White House tapes, where Richard Nixon is speaking to Art Linkletter. Art Linkletter was a television host, a radio host, very well beloved for decades by the 1970s. His biggest hit was something called Kids Say the Darndest Things. Here's Art Linkletter explaining it to Richard Nixon, how people smoke to get high, but drink to have fun.
Well, I suppose they could say that alcoholics don't think straight too, can't they? Yes, sure. Surely. But another big difference in marijuana and alcohol is that when people smoke marijuana, they smoke it to get high. In every case, when most people drink, they drink to be social. You don't see people. That's right. That's right. See, they sit down with a marijuana cigarette to get high. A person does not drink to get drunk. That's right. A person drinks to have fun. If they smoke marijuana, you smoke marijuana. You want to get a charge. Right now, I'm sorry. You want to get a charge, float, this and that and the other thing.
You want to smoke to get a charge. Yeah, that's how much understanding they had about cannabis back in the day. And it wasn't just Nixon's opposition to blacks and the anti-war left. Nixon was also anti-Semitic as hell and quite homophobic. This quote from Richard Nixon talks about, the context here is he's talking about Russia. Actually, I should say the Soviet Union back in the day, and how they were tough on the gays and tough on the drug takers. And they're a strong society because they don't put up with any of that crap. And in this clip, Nixon is lamenting how the American left, how liberals, left-wingers, are pushing dope and homosexuality to destroy America.
Let's look at the strong society, the Russians. God damn it, they root them out. They don't let them around at all. You know what I mean? I don't know what to do with them. Now, we are allowing this in this country. We'll destroy the country. Dope. Do you think the Russians allow dope? Hell no. Not if they can allow it. Not if they can catch it. They send them up. You see, homosexuality, dope, immorality in general, these are the enemies of strong societies. That's why the communists and the left-wingers are pushing each other. They're trying to destroy us.
Dope, homosexuality, and immorality are the enemies of strong societies. That's why the communists and the left-wingers are trying to push them. They're trying to destroy America. Wow. It's just, when people are raising holy hell lately about Donald Trump and some of the things he says, you got to at least give him credit for one thing, and that it's that he's saying it out loud in public. He's not a Richard Nixon who's going to put forth a happy society face and tough on crime, law and order and try to justify his racism, his homophobia, his sexism, his anti-Semitism, his anti-liberalism. At least with Trump, you know what you're getting. Nixon, we had to wait until we could get it off of the Nixon tapes. Here's one more clip from the Nixon tapes. Nixon talking about how now drugs are something we have to worry about because it's becoming a white problem.
When will marijuana come out? The marijuana will come out in March 72. In other words, we are coming into the final phases of it now. We've had all of our public hearings. We have 9 more informal hearings. All your public hearings? All of the public hearings, yes. And we have had several informal hearings. We have 9 more of those, including one at Federal College Monday here right here in Washington. It's actually a very interesting hearing, and we would sound hard on anybody who's on the subject. This is like show. almost 85%, which I think is now becoming a white phenomenon.
Over 75% of the arrests are white. It's becoming a white problem. It's no clearer than that, folks, as to the real origins of this war on drugs. And not even just Richard Nixon. Of course, a lot of times when we look at this racism in the war on drugs, we'll go all the way back to Harry J. Anslinger saying that reefer makes the darkies think they're as good as white men, and reefer causes the white women to want to have sexual relations with Negroes and entertainers. That was our first drug war, begun in 1937 on the foundation of racism, and it was continued in 1971 by Richard Nixon on a foundation of racism, and it continues to this day on a foundation of racism. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in 2 minutes, and we're going to talk a little bit about cannabis dependence, a pot pipeline from Mexico, and which illegal states are most curious about legal weed when we return.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
The next generation of vaporizers has arrived. Vuber vaporizers are blazing the way with unparalleled technology for oil, concentrate, or dry flower pens. Providing unsurpassed customer service and expert craftsmanship, Vuber vaporizers use cutting-edge technology, providing a power-packed, smoother vapor with a lifetime guarantee. Experience vaporizing the way it was meant to be. The Vuber way.
Every strain, every sale, every medical study. Keep it right here on the Cannabis Radio Network.
Are you playing an acoustic guitar but want to be louder without an amp? Try a resonator guitar. The fingerboard extension has National Resophonic and other resonators, square necks and round necks. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com. Go wild hog in the woods.
Educator, author, and advocate Dr. Mitch Earlywine is here to tackle the burning issues.
And I'm here to clear up the myths about cannabis and burn them away with science.
CannabisRadio.com presents a no-holds-barred platform that seeks to redefine and revolutionize the entire scope of the cannabis culture while opening the door for more to join the cannabis crusade.
Dr. Kevin Hill.
You can't ignore the fact that, like alcohol, most people who use don't have a problem. So I think that you need to think about policy in that way while educating people properly about marijuana. I think that's the way to go.
Burning Issues, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Most of us pirates, we go on vacation to North Dakota, you know, because they've got a town called Argosville. What are you smoking there, boy?
This is Dan Michaels from DanMichaelsAudio.com, and you're listening to Radical Russ on CannabisRadio.com.
We've turned the corner on drug addiction in the United States. Drug addiction in the United States is under control.
There you go. It's all over, folks. Don't worry about it. Nixon has turned the corner. We've got drug addiction under control. Nothing to see here. Move along. What's this? Oh, wait a minute. We're getting something in on our flux capacitor, ladies and gentlemen. We're needing to go now live to the 1920s.
Stupid Prohibition Stories. As a public service, the Russ Belville Show reminds you that smoking marijuana does not make one stupid. However, some stupid people do smoke marijuana, and prohibition is always waiting for another victim. Learn your lesson from today's Stupid Prohibition Stories.
With your Stupid Prohibition Stories, I'm old-timey 1920s radio reporter Freddie Farrak. This just in from Henrico, Virginia. A former Henrico teacher is in trouble with the law for allegedly letting students get stoned in class. Police say 23-year-old Dominic Luzzi was doing more than just teaching shop class. They claim he was enabling students to do a little higher learning. Henrico County Police Lieutenant Chris Ely says, quote, Dominic Luzzi was actually allowing students to smoke marijuana in his classroom, end quote. Up until recently, Luzzi was a shop teacher at the Academy of Virginia Randolph, a high school for academically and behaviorally challenged kids. There's a sign in the front of the school that reads it's supposed to be a drug-free zone. But according to investigators, Luzzi let some students feel free to light up. Lieutenant Ely says, quote, we got a call from the administration of Henrico County Public Schools saying they received information from students that a teacher was allowing them to smoke marijuana in class, end quote. Now, the 23-year-old teacher faces 3 charges of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Court records show at least 3 teens allegedly smoked weed under Mr. Luzzi's watch. A spokesperson for Henrico County Public Schools says Luzzi is no longer employed by the school or the district. I'm Freddie Farrock with your stupid Prohibition story! Are you kidding me? Man, my shop class was never that cool. I thought you were just supposed to make a bong in shop class, right? You weren't supposed to actually smoke it in shop class. Oh my God. Okay. I don't even know how to respond to this one. On the one hand, cool. Like what a great class that was. No, folks, I'm just kidding, right? Teachers, let's just be on the record here. Teachers, don't let your kids smoke pot in class. Thank you. That's this message brought to you by the Russ Belville Show. Oh my God. Smoking pot in the shop class. That's how I've heard everything. All right, let me get back to some of the other stories that we've got here in the pipeline. And very interesting story coming out of Leafly. You know Leafly. It's the website that tracks, dispensaries and pot shops and has menus and so forth. Well, Leafly decided to do some number crunching on their search records. And they wanted to find out which illegal states are the most cannabis curious. In other words, when you take a look at the illegal states, what percentage of people from those states are looking at the legal dispensary pages on, for Colorado or Washington or Oregon and so forth. So they took a look at 26 states where cannabis is either completely illegal or it's just a CBD only type of state. And they mapped the visits to Leafly over a 6-month period, geographically speaking, to find out who is visiting Leafly most often to look up marijuana. And the results were pretty astounding, blowing every other state out of the water with almost twice as many hits as the second place state is Texas. Texas had over 2.8 million hits on Leafly compared to the next closest state, which was Florida, which was a bit over 1.4 million hits. So kudos to my activist friends in Texas, DFW Normal, Houston Normal, Centex Normal, Waco Normal, all you guys down there, Texas Normal in Austin. Good work, because you got people thinking about it. You got them looking up marijuana information on Leafly. By far, the state with the greatest curiosity about marijuana. Florida comes in number 2 at 1.4 million hits. Georgia comes in number 3 at 800,000 hits. Pennsylvania comes in 4th at about 800,000. Virginia, little more than 600,000. And Ohio at about 600,000. And what I'd like to point out about all 6 of those states I just listed, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio, all those states, very strong marijuana activism states. Texas has some of the best normal chapters in the country. Florida has been going for medical marijuana and also has some great normal chapters and SSDP chapters. Georgia, of course, has Georgia normal, Peachtree normal. They've been doing some great work. Pennsylvania, Philly normal, Pittsburgh normal. Virginia, Virginia normal, and Northern Virginia normal. Ohio, numerous chapters in Ohio. And as I look down at the bottom of the list here of these 26 states that they covered, because remember, the 24 medical marijuana states aren't in this list, and the legal states aren't. The states with the least amount of cannabis curiosity, Wyoming, South Dakota, and North Dakota. And of those 3 states, I can guarantee you there's just almost nothing with respect to marijuana activism. I believe there's a Wyoming normal, and I think they've been pushing for a legalization bill. Now, the other thing that's concerning about this is that this is a raw number of hits. Right? So when we're talking about Texas and Florida, we're talking about 2 states with a huge population. These numbers haven't been broken down into hits per capita. And I'm going to take a look at these numbers. If I can get the actual raw data from Leafly, I'd like to crunch these numbers and find out where are you getting the most curiosity per capita. Kind of unfair to compare a Wyoming, the least populated state in the nation, with Texas and Florida, 2 of the most populated states in the nation. But still, the information is interesting. And it's good to know that Texas has so much interest in marijuana. All right, let me get to another story. This one on the medical side. This is coming from news-medical.net. And the headline, immediate treatment can benefit cannabis users who experience withdrawal symptoms. Well, first of all, we got to talk a little bit about cannabis withdrawal. It's always kind of a sticky topic to talk about because with other drugs, there's a very clear withdrawal. In fact, it's a withdrawal that can kill you. If you're addicted to opiates, or you're addicted to alcohol, or even addicted to amphetamines, quitting those things cold turkey can kill you. That's a pretty heavy-duty withdrawal symptom, don't you think? And if they don't kill you, they're going to cause other physical withdrawal symptoms that are undeniable. Alcoholics will go into the delirium tremens. They'll get these trembling, these tremors that they have. They'll experience hallucinations. They'll experience pain. Heroin addicts will experience extreme nausea, pain. Amphetamine addicts will experience severe cravings. I mean, these withdrawals cannot be denied. But when it comes to cannabis, the people in the medical fields have decided there is such a thing as a cannabis withdrawal syndrome. And what a cannabis withdrawal syndrome basically amounts to is you run out of weed and you're bummed that you ran out of weed. Now, there's a little more to that. They will say that cannabis withdrawal symptom is characterized by craving for weed, irritability, insomnia, sometimes anger issues, hardly delirium tremens and death, but there can be this withdrawal syndrome. Now, my cure for cannabis withdrawal syndrome is to smoke some cannabis. When I'm having withdrawal syndrome, I just get more. But when we talk about these treatments, these medical professionals are talking about people who are experiencing cannabis dependence. And this is another controversial issue. The DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychologists and Psychiatrists, defines substance abuse disorders as those people that use a substance and then that they keep using that substance despite negative impacts to their life. They have trouble trying to quit, have tried to quit and haven't been able to quit. They spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get their substance, and they sometimes experience workplace and legal difficulties because of their substance use. And where the controversy comes in here, and it's the same controversy I point out time and time again in many different aspects of cannabis research, and that is, when cannabis is illegal, it's hard to tease out what's the effect of the drug versus what's the effect of the prohibition. You're going to say that I have a cannabis dependence syndrome because I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find cannabis? Have you ever tried to come up with a bag of good weed in Kansas? it might take an inordinate amount of time. But that has nothing to do with whether you're dependent on it or not. It has to do with the prohibition that makes the supply of cannabis scarce in Kansas. So how can we have a criterion for determining dependence that in and of itself is dependent on whether or not the drug is prohibited? What I'm trying to say here is you're much more likely to find someone in Kansas or Oklahoma who spends a whole lot of time trying to get weed than someone in Oregon who can walk a few blocks down the street and buy it at a pot shop. So of what good is this criterion when legalization is going to pretty much wipe it out in a legal state? And then they talk about legal or employment problems with your cannabis use. You keep using cannabis despite legal and employment problems. Well, the legal and employment problems are in large part due to the fact it's illegal. If I fail my P test, I lose my job. If I am caught with marijuana and arrested and that becomes public knowledge, I get kicked out of school or I get busted and go to jail. But that doesn't signify that cannabis was causing my problem. That signifies that prohibition caused my problem. How many people out there would get a diagnosis of coffee dependence if there were workplace tests for caffeine and getting caught with caffeine in your system would get you fired and getting caught buying caffeine would get you thrown in jail or ticketed? Do you think we'd see more people with a cannabis dependence syndrome? But this story, let me get back to the story, talks about how researchers at the University of Illinois found that 85% of people who met the criteria for cannabis withdrawal used cannabis again within about 16 days, while other individuals stayed abstinent about 24 days before using again. So people that have this cannabis withdrawal, about 85% of them used again in 16 days. The other 15% used 24 days later. They were 110 young adults in the study. They were near daily users of cannabis who consumed about 70 out of 90 days prior to enter treatment, nearly daily. They experienced withdrawal symptoms, reporting an average of two symptoms, folks. On average, 2 symptoms. So for an average to be 2, you know that a whole lot of people had to have only 1 symptom, right? But an average of 2 symptoms. The symptoms reported were mood disturbances. About half the people, 48%, found they were a little irritable, little edgy, a little sullen when they didn't have their pot. 40% of them reported difficulty sleeping. And 33% reported restlessness. Ooh, restlessness. Now, first of all, are those the kind of symptoms that are going to cause us to be alarmed here? One of the first things I think about here, especially when they bring up the part about difficulty sleeping, is that how many of these people that you're considering to be cannabis dependent are actually using cannabis for the medicinal benefit of curing insomnia? Strange thing happened, Bob. We took all these insomniacs that were using pot, and when we made them stop using pot, why, they had trouble sleeping. Yeah, must be a cannabis withdrawal syndrome. No, it's underlying insomnia, and you just stopped the treatment for it. That's the problem. Mood disturbances. Got a little irritable when they didn't have the pot. Well, again, how many people there are using marijuana to treat anxiety, to treat anger issues, to treat stress? And then you take their medicine from them. What do you know? Oh my God, they're stressed out. They're angry. God, that's like saying when someone has low blood sugar and passes out because you took away their insulin, that they have an insulin dependence problem. They're having insulin withdrawals. No, they've got freaking diabetes, man. These things piss me off. Gotta take a break. We'll be right back to close up shop right after this.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Tommy Chong is ready to cut through the smoke and change the tone of Tilk Radio.
You know, during Dance with the Stars, I started feeling discomfort. Yeah. And not only that, I was doing these old man smells. And it was kind of embarrassing because, all the Dancing with the Stars crew, cast and crew, they were all young kids. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, this old guy would come along and do one of those silent farts, that you don't know you're doing it. Yeah. And all of a sudden you smell, and everybody go, what the hell smells? And, and it was me. And so I'd scurry off to the bathroom, and that's when I knew that there was something wrong.
The Tommy Chong Podcast, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome to my world.
This is the Russ Belville Show, annoying Kevin Sabet since 2012.
It's time for Cannabis Facts about Alzheimer's from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A new Florida study in the journal Molecular and Cellular Neuroscience found that cannabis promotes the growth of healthy new brain tissue. It can slow the effects of Alzheimer's and may in fact be able to halt it entirely. A long-term study by Ohio State University's Professor Gary Wenk concludes that people who regularly use marijuana get Alzheimer's at a much lower rate than others. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
We have your smoking section right here. This is the Cannabis Radio Network.
Coming soon to a city near you, Cannabis Finance Boot Camp. Get all your cannabis accounting, legal, and compliance questions answered by their knowledgeable panel of industry experts who want to help your cannabis business boom. Whether you're a grower, dispensary operator, or a newcomer to the field, your cannabis business needs Cannabis Finance Boot Camp. For information on upcoming events, visit CannabisFinanceBootCamp.com.
Well, folks, that's all the time we got for today's show. Thanks for joining us, and make sure you're with us tomorrow. We got another great episode of the Russ Belville Show coming to you live on CannabisRadio.com. Our guest will be Alec Rockford from Doobie, a new online social media for us cannabis consumers. And then make sure you join us next week. I'll be bringing you a series of shows live from Las Vegas, Nevada. We got Dr. Mitch on Monday. We got Adam Eidinger from Washington, D.C. on Tuesday. And Doug Fine with our Hemp Day Hump Day update on Wednesday. For everyone here at CannabisRadio.com, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. You can catch me, Radical Russ, everywhere on anything that has a username. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at RadicalRuss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.